Welcome on in, guys. Three bold takes again, and today we have a different style video. We're kind of transitioning to our off-season mode here, but we are big fans of Josh Pate here, and on one of his recent episodes, there was a clip of something that we wanted to discuss. I think it's pretty relevant between the BCS and the playoff era in college football. A lot of controversy, obviously, over the Florida State debacle. So a lot of people are saying that, human eyes should not be involved in picking teams. It should be a computer, which is what the BCS was. So first off, thanks for tuning in. My name's Freddie. I've got Chase to my left. I've got Quinn to my right here. Leave a like, subscribe if you like what you see. I'm going to play the clip. Once I play the clip, Chase, you start us off. What are your thoughts? But first, let's hear from Mr. Pate here.
Andrew hit us up with his radical college football opinion. He said the BCS, while having its own drawbacks, was a much better system than the College Football Playoff Committee. Fact, fact, fact. And Andrew, keep it up, Colin. Excuse me, never mind immunity. Andrew said exactly how he should have phrased it. He said the BCS, despite having its drawbacks, was still better than the current system we have. So
that's the clip, right? That despite the drawbacks of the BCS, it's still better than the playoff system right now. That's an interesting debate. Chase, what are your initial thoughts on that? Is he right or is he wrong?
Man, call me a 60-year-old old head, man. I think he's exactly right. I've been preaching this since we even talked the discussion of a playoff before it even was a thing. I've always been pro because it takes human bias out of it a little bit. So if you don't know how the BCS worked, if you're too young, if you're like 12 and watching this and saying, "Oh my gosh, three bold takes, I love you guys," and you didn't know how the BCS system worked, so relied on a combination of polls and computer selection methods that determined the team rankings and got it down to the two teams, right? So it looked at like strength of schedule, strength of record, who you played, all that kind of stuff, how you won. I think it even determined it used a little bit of style points. I could be wrong in that, but it used that. So like, if Wyoming goes 13-0 or 12-0 and they play a group of five teams and Alabama goes 10-2, they know, hey, we're not going to rank Wyoming over Alabama. So for me, I think this is right on par. Again, BCS wasn't perfect. You left out some good teams. He mentioned Auburn later in this video as one of the teams that fell short in the BCS era. But at the same point, it always chose the best teams no matter their record. So, and it also, I thought it was more competitive. The bowl games outside of the BCS system was more competitive. The NY6 bowls were extremely competitive. And maybe that has to do with transfer portal opt-outs now. But I think when you look at this, it got the two best teams. And it also didn't have athletic directors, former coaches, former whatever tied to schools that helped select them. I mean, the head guy for the CFP is from NC State. Okay, well, that's ACC, right? Well, ACC, what if he doesn't like Florida State? Is that a reason Florida State also had a big happening of being left out this season? I think when you leave human bias in it, it's going to create that controversy about it. And there will always be people that don't understand how, or fans don't understand the impact that goes into those meetings. So I think leaving it up to a system, leaving it up to a computer and the metrics behind that makes it a lot simpler and gets the best teams in there no matter what. Quinn?
Yeah, I'll start with this. I got three things I want to talk about when it comes to the BCS versus the playoff era, and I'll start with how we rank the teams. BCS had that hands down. The only reason we left the BCS system was reaction or was a reactionary like kickback to having Alabama versus LSU in the national title. When that happened, we steamrolled our way to the 14 playoff because how could a computer put the answer is Oklahoma State lost to like a 3-win Iowa State team that year. That's how the computer decided that Alabama, who lost to an undefeated LSU, was probably better. So for me, hands down, the computer does not take bias into it, does not take alternate agenda. It strictly takes who you've beaten, how you've beaten them, who you've lost to, how you lost to them. Now, the one drawback to the BCS is it does not account for like injuries to a player early in the year, and it doesn't account for teams getting hot late and being cold early. Everything is like neutral, but it is a computer algorithm, so you could set it to adjust for those things if you wanted to. We look at the bowl games, like the BCS bowl games, the New Year's Six bowl games that have no impact on the national title. They were slightly more competitive in the BCS era, but I really think that has more to do with the transfer portal and opt-outs becoming a thing in like 2014-15, and less to do with it's the playoffs fault. I don't really think that's it. I think just the popularity of the league and the idea that now there is a playoff kind of diminished a regular bowl game in some sense, but I don't know. I don't really think there's much of a difference there. Nothing that really makes me lean one way or the other. Now, when we talk about the national title, Chase, I couldn't disagree with you more. You did not always get the two best teams in the country in the national title during the BCS. That did not happen. USC ran Oklahoma out of the building in 04. Auburn should have been there instead of Oklahoma. Notre Dame, they were undefeated and they deserved to be in the national title in 2012. But you cannot convince me they were better than Oregon in 2012. That's just not the case. Alabama, Oregon were the two best teams. And in a playoff scenario, you would have Notre Dame get eliminated by somebody else, or at least get to see that Alabama, Oregon game before the national title. So I personally don't think that the national title games were better, because when you look at the national title games in the playoff era, Ohio State, Oregon was competitive for 2.5 quarters before Ohio State pulled away. Two of the three Alabama Clemson games were classics. Both Alabama Georgia games were classics. LSU Clemson was competitive for a good little bit before LSU pulled away. Really, there was only two blowouts pending Michigan Washington, because we're recording this pre that championship game. There were really only two major blowouts in the playoff era. I can think of multiple blowouts in the BCS era, and I think that has a lot to do with having that whole month to prep, and it puts so much more emphasis on like an elite coaching staff rather than players making plays in the moment. And it also opens up the teams who might have actually been better who lost one game. For example, and I'll end with this, 2014, you got Ohio State versus Oregon in the national title game. Ohio State beat Alabama. Oregon clobbered Florida State. Your national title game that year in the BCS would have been Alabama, Florida State. So some years it doesn't matter. Some years it does. Another example, 2017, Alabama, Georgia for the national title ended in that thriller OT game. That year's national championship game would have been Clemson, Oklahoma. So personally, I think it's more of a longing for something that used to exist and not really remembering what its flaws were. I think the playoff era is better if you get rid of the committee and use a computer system to rank the teams rather than a committee. I think the format is better.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree with what Quinn said. No, in no way, shape, or form did the BCS guarantee the two best teams in the country. And in no way, shape, or form did the playoff committee or the inception of the playoff ever guarantee to get the four best teams. That's always their goal, right? But how do you evaluate teams? Every person's different. Do you give the edge to somebody that started off slow and got hot? Or do you give the edge to somebody who lost a game midway through the year like Texas? Like, who do you give the edge to in that scenario as a human? Each mind is going to be different. What I think should happen, and Quinn, I agree with you. I think instead of having a committee, right, You take the BCS. We'll just say this. I know it would be a different algorithm, but let's just take something like the BCS to give you the top 12 teams or even the top 15 teams. Then you take a committee and you handpick the order of what you think they are, right? So you're guaranteed to get, according to the computer, 12 teams that are the best in the country. Then you take the human element of, are they hot? Do they have injuries? That sort of thing, to take those 12 teams and place them in the order that they should be in. And if you take a look at the BCS, what it would have been this year, guess what? Florida State still ain't getting in.
True.
I mean, I saw the simulated rankings. They weren't in the top 4. They're ranked 5th.
I thought they were. I thought it was Texas that was 5th.
It was Texas that was 5th. You were right. You were right. Texas was 5th.
Wasn't.
So Florida State was in.
Okay.
But even then, it's different teams, right? Different matchups. Now, for the playoffs case here, do they always get the 4 best teams? No. But do they always have one of the best teams in the country playing for national championship? Yes. I mean, the best has to rise from the rest. I mean, that is literally how it has to be. You can't tell me that, obviously this year is different because it's 1 versus 2, right? But in other years, it's not 1 versus 2. I mean, the 4 seed has won a national title. I honestly think the number 1 seed's only won it 1 time. Am I mistaken by that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're mistaken. They've won it a couple.
Typically, the 4th or 3rd gets up there, I believe. Like, they get to the championship game. Go ahead, Quinn.
I believe the most is the 2 seed, which still holds true to the BCS as well. The team who was ranked number 2 won more than the team ranked number 1. Every seed has won the title, though. But as far as 1 seeds that have won it, Georgia won it last year, Alabama in 2020, LSU in 2019. I believe those are the only 3, though.
Yeah, out of 10 years. So I don't know. It's interesting. I love the playoff era. I think it added a little bit more to the excitement to the last couple weeks of the year. I mean, obviously BCS, you've got 2 spots, right? And if you're in Alabama coming into the SEC championship game ranked 8th in the BCS, even if you beat Georgia, I don't think you jump all the way into the top 4. Right now, obviously they got beat by Michigan, so it's not like they're playing for a national championship anyway. But the thought still holds true. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting topic, but I do think that there needs to be a collection of both, between a computer-generated model on who the 12 teams are, and then you handpick matchups, right? Because let's be real, matchups is what's make college football great, especially when you go to the 12-team playoff. You want matchups you don't see every day. You don't want an Ole Miss, Georgia in round 1 of the playoffs. You don't want, an Alabama, Tennessee, or what have you. These games we've already seen in the regular season. You don't want that. So handpick the matchups on what you think to account injuries, Quinn.
I'll end with this because I don't want to end on just a fence-riding answer, even though it's what I do believe, which is that if you had the playoff format with the BCS ranking, that would be the best. Just to pick one or the other and not the fence ride, I personally think that the playoff era is better than the BCS.
And what I'd like to mention too is, like, when you look at it with the committee, and when I say like cherry picking, like TCU last year, TCU was not a top 4 team. They had the record. Yes, they beat Michigan, but the top 4 teams, all 4 should equally have the opportunity, or not the opportunity, the actual shot at winning the national championship. We have that this year. One of these 4 teams could all win the national championship. That's why it's one of the best fields. Last year, though, TCU didn't deserve to be there. I think what you do is you take the BCS system, use that metric, get your top 12 teams, and then after that, okay, well, Oklahoma State, they're 13, but they had an injury for the first 6 weeks to their quarterback. They got hot late. Let's put them here at 12 instead of Liberty or an Ole Miss that lost their last 4 games. I think that's what you do instead. Because I think that's my problem with the playoff era as a whole, and why I like the BCS, is the human bias behind it. You take that out, then I'm all for the playoffs. And I think that's how you change it, is using the system and then taking in the, okay, Jordan Travis is hurt, let's move him, let's do this kind of thing.
But see, I'll say this: my issue with the BCS though was it was such a small like margin for error. There were only 2 teams that were going to get a shot at a national title. And sometimes, and it's not even sometimes, it's a fact, there were teams who did not get to play for titles who were better than teams who were getting to because they slipped up once in the season. And like that is what it is, win it on the field, you know, but I prefer that, you know, these teams